She stood barefoot in the quiet of her kitchen, staring into the stainless steel sink, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the air like a distant memory. For months, her body had produced more milk than her newborn daughter could drink. Friends and family had marveled at her ability, jokingly calling her a miracle of modern motherhood. But to her, it felt like a calling. Something deeper. Something waiting to be shaped into purpose. Her name was Leora, and she had always been driven by instincts stronger than convention. As the days passed, her freezer filled with neatly labeled bags of breast milk, stored with care. There was too much for her baby alone, and she knew this surplus could mean the world to infants in need. In late-night feeds and quiet dawns, she began researching, reaching out to doctors, midwives, and mothers across the globe. What began as an act of maternal generosity slowly bloomed into a vision, an enterprise shaped not by industry, but by intimacy. The factory began not in a warehouse, but in a home. She sterilized everything obsessively, learning safety protocols, studying nutrient preservation techniques, and ensuring every ounce of milk retained its vital life-giving quality. Soon, she was donating to local neonatal units, to mothers struggling with supply, to babies who had lost their mothers too early. The demand grew with the whispers of gratitude, and her home transformed into a humming hub of activity. Friends with newborns offered to contribute their milk too, inspired by her passion. She accepted only the most rigorously tested samples, ensuring the highest standards. What mattered most was trust, between donor, processor, and recipient. Eventually, she rented a small building on the edge of town. It had been a bakery once, filled with flour and heat. Now, it smelled faintly of sterilized steel and the sweet, unmistakable scent of life. The walls were painted in calming shades, and the cold rooms held rows of carefully sealed bottles, each traceable back to its source, each tested, documented, and approved. Leora stood at the helm, not in a suit or behind a polished desk, but in her simple clothes, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, heart open. Her staff included lactation consultants, nutritionists, and a growing team of donors, mothers who believed, like she did, that their milk could go farther than they ever imagined. Soon, stories started to arrive, videos of premature infants growing stronger, thank you notes from mothers with low supply, emails from adoptive parents feeding their babies with something human and warm. Leora read them all, her eyes wet with joy and awe. Her company, once just an idea in the hush of a kitchen, had crossed oceans. Shipments left her facility in climate-controlled containers, wrapped in care and legality, accompanied by the hope of mothers who had given more than just milk, they had given connection. Governments began to take notice. Some raised eyebrows, skeptical of her model, questioning the ethics and regulations surrounding human milk commerce. But Leora met every challenge with transparency and science. She invited them into her facility, showed them the testing procedures, the medical oversight, the donor care programs. She had no interest in exploiting the body, only honoring its ability to nourish beyond the boundaries of biology. Then came the first international partnership. A pediatric clinic in another continent struggling with infant mortality reached out, asking for support. Leora worked day and night to establish secure channels, ensuring the milk would arrive fresh and safe. When the first batch landed and was used to feed underweight infants, the clinic sent back a photograph, a row of babies sleeping soundly, pink cheeks rising with breath. It was framed and hung in the hallway of her factory, a reminder of why she had begun. More women joined. Some came from far away, having heard of Leora's mission. They were not looking to profit, they wanted to participate. She built networks for them, offered health care and emotional support, and created a community that stretched across time zones. It wasn't just a milk company anymore, it was a movement, bound by the biology of compassion and the miracle of nourishment. Media outlets caught on. Articles were written. Interviews aired. People were curious, sometimes skeptical, but often moved. She always answered the same way, with quiet clarity, this isn't about business. It's about giving. Giving what we can, when we can, because someone out there needs it. The world had never seen anything like it, and yet, somehow, it felt as ancient as the bond between mother and child. As the movement grew, so did the noise around it. For every grateful parent or inspired mother, there were critics who couldn't grasp the concept. They called it unnatural, commodified, even dangerous. Talk shows debated her work with polarized panels. Online forums buzzed with opinions, praise and outrage tangled like vines. But Leora stayed rooted in the simplicity of her mission. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The truth lived in the evidence, the babies who thrived, the mothers who healed through giving, the doctors who reached out asking for more. She began to travel, not as a businesswoman but as a witness. She visited hospitals and villages where her milk had arrived. In one remote clinic, she met a nurse who had been rationing formula in heartbreaking doses until the first shipment from Leora's factory arrived. The nurse took her hand, eyes shining. "You saved them," she whispered. Leora could only shake her head. "No, we saved each other." In another city, she was invited to speak at a conference on maternal health. Standing before a room of policymakers and healthcare leaders, she told the story of her first sleepless nights with her daughter, the overflowing freezer, the moment when necessity became vision. She ended not with statistics or slides, but with silence, a moment to let the idea settle into the room like warm milk into a bottle. When she stepped down from the podium, no one clapped immediately. They were still absorbing. The factory had expanded. It now included research labs, donor lounges, quiet rooms with rocking chairs and soft lights. Women came not just to give, but to talk, to share, to cry. There were counselors on staff, and free childcare. Every drop of milk carried more than nutrients, it carried stories, tears, strength, sacrifice. Leora refused to let the process become cold or industrial. Even as orders flooded in from across the globe, she made sure that every mother's experience was respected, that every bottle was sealed with dignity. Then one morning, her daughter, now walking and laughing and full of personality, toddled into the facility. She reached for one of the small bottles, curious. Leora gently took her hand. "That's going to a baby who needs it," she explained. The little girl blinked, then nodded with innocent seriousness. "Like me when I was tiny?" she asked. Leora smiled. "Yes. Just like you." It was the first time her daughter truly understood what her mother had built. As the seasons passed, new branches of the factory opened in other countries, each one designed to reflect the values Leora had insisted on since the beginning: care, consent, safety, and warmth. Donor milk was handled like gold, tested, pasteurized gently, tracked meticulously, and delivered with reverence. No corner was cut, no protocol rushed. She began working with researchers to better understand the unique qualities of breast milk, its immune-boosting properties, its potential to help premature babies not just survive, but thrive. Together, they developed innovations in cold chain transport, designed new sterilization equipment that preserved more nutrients, and created donor networks that empowered women economically and emotionally. Her work had started a ripple across maternal care systems. Some countries began re-examining their policies on milk donation. Milk banks once understaffed and underfunded found new models in her approach. She received letters from medical students saying her work had inspired them to study neonatal nutrition. Leora read those letters late at night, her daughter asleep beside her, and let the tears come freely. Still, she never let the company lose its soul. Each month, she hosted a gathering at the main facility. Donors came, sometimes with their babies, sometimes alone. They shared meals, told stories, and reminded each other that this strange, beautiful thing they were part of wasn't just about feeding children, it was about lifting each other up, 1 ounce at a time. Then, one winter, something extraordinary happened. A mother who had received donor milk during her child's first fragile months arrived at one of the gatherings. Her baby, now healthy and full of life, was in her arms. She spotted the woman whose milk had nourished her child. Without words, she walked over, placed the baby gently into the donor's arms, and stepped back. The room fell silent. The baby cooed, resting easily in the arms of a stranger whose body had unknowingly kept her alive. Leora watched it happen, her throat tight. No policy, no regulation, no marketing strategy could ever capture that moment. It was something primal, raw, and real, a circle quietly completing itself. The quiet awe in that room stayed with Leora long after the event ended. She carried it home with her, like a warm echo in her chest. She thought of it as a kind of grace, a reminder that what they were doing wasn't just remarkable, it was sacred. In the months that followed, her story reached further than she had ever expected. Not through flashy campaigns or corporate rollouts, but through word of mouth, shared between mothers in hospital waiting rooms, whispered in neonatal intensive care units, passed between midwives, nurses, and pediatricians like something holy. Her name became less important than the idea itself, a global circle of women sustaining life with their bodies, and doing it with trust. New partnerships began forming with refugee clinics, disaster relief organizations, and remote communities where infant nutrition was scarce. Leora refused to allow red tape or politics to get in the way. She had learned to navigate complex import and health regulations with a patience born of necessity. With each shipment, her team sent instructions, medical oversight, and personal notes handwritten in native languages. She believed in human connection even across borders. A woman in a desert camp, living in a tent with her twins, received donor milk during a drought when nothing else was available. She sent back a photo, not through a professional agency, just through a nurse who had passed through and promised to deliver it. It showed her 2 children holding hands, milk dribbling from their smiling mouths. It was stained with dust and handled many times, but Leora framed it anyway and placed it beside the photo of the sleeping babies from years ago. There were days when the logistics overwhelmed her. Storage breakdowns, delayed flights, customs blocks, skepticism from old institutions that didn't understand how something so intimate could be so global. But Leora never lost sight of the roots. In every meeting, she kept one image in her mind, her baby in her arms, the first time she had pumped a bottle and set it down on the counter, not knowing then that it would become the seed of a revolution. She was invited to speak at a global health summit. The room was grand, filled with world leaders and medical pioneers. She walked onto the stage in a simple dress, holding not a speech, but a small, frosted glass bottle. She held it up, allowing the light to pass through the pale liquid inside. "This," she said, "is not a product. It's a thread that ties one life to another. It's the oldest form of giving. Before science, before systems, there was this." Her words didn't need to be many. The silence in the room was a kind of agreement. An understanding. When she finished, the applause didn't erupt, it rose slowly, like a tide. Afterward, people approached her not to network, but to tell stories. A doctor whose own child had survived on donor milk. A politician who'd watched his niece grow strong from a stranger's gift. A nurse from a war zone who begged for a collaboration. Leora took every name, every contact, every handshake. She wasn't building a company anymore. She was building a map of compassion. Back at home, her daughter had started school. She told her classmates with pride, "My mommy helps feed the babies." One day, she brought home a drawing, a picture of the world, and little bottles with wings flying across oceans. Leora looked at it and laughed softly, her chest tightening with love. "That's exactly what we do," she whispered. As years passed, the factory became more than one place. It was a network now, a growing constellation of centers, some large and clinical, others small and homegrown, but all linked by Leora's code of ethics. Women were trained, supported, paid fairly. Milk was never taken without informed consent. Every ounce was honored. One of the newer facilities was run entirely by women who had once been recipients themselves. They knew better than anyone what it meant to be held in that way, to receive nourishment when the world had otherwise gone cold. Leora visited them often, not as a founder, but as a friend. They would share meals, laugh, cry, and tell her how the ripple she had started was becoming a wave. And yet, she remained humble. She kept her hands in the work, testing batches, responding to emails from new mothers unsure if they could donate, writing back to families who had sent photos and thanks. She would spend evenings in the same quiet way she had started, in the kitchen, a warm drink in hand, the fridge humming softly, reflecting on how everything extraordinary had begun with something as ordinary as a body choosing to give. Years flowed gently onward, and with them, the rhythm of the world Leora had helped shape deepened. It was no longer rare to hear of breast milk being flown to orphanages, hospitals, disaster zones. What had once felt radical now stood as a respected pillar of infant care, though still fiercely protected from the cold creep of mass commodification. That line, the one between care and commerce, was one Leora walked with unwavering precision. She had built safeguards into the heart of the company. Profits were reinvested into community health programs, donor wellness initiatives, postpartum mental health support, and education for young mothers. Milk was never for sale in the way formula was. It was never on shelves, never reduced to packaging and price points. It was distributed through medical partnerships, vetted programs, and networks built on equity, not exploitation. She still received letters. A mother in a distant city wrote of how, when her own body failed to produce, she'd felt broken, until her doctor handed her a bottle from Leora's network. "You made me feel whole again," the letter read. "You reminded me I wasn't failing. I was part of something larger." Leora read those words one morning while the sky was still gray and low, and tears slipped down her face without drama. There was no audience, no announcement, just a quiet recognition of the change she was part of. It had always been about more than milk. It was about reminding women of their power to sustain, not just life, but each other. She returned, often, to the earliest facility. Though now the organization spanned continents and employed hundreds, she still felt most at home among the original walls, where chipped tiles and the hum of old machinery brought her back to beginnings. There was a tree outside the building now, one she had planted with her daughter. Its branches stretched across the yard like reaching arms, and its roots had long broken through the concrete in places, wild and uncontainable. Just like the dream. One afternoon, she sat beneath that tree with a visitor, a young woman from a distant country who had traveled to meet her. She was pregnant with her first child and wanted to learn everything. They sat in the shade and shared stories. The young woman asked if Leora had ever imagined this. "No," Leora said, smiling. "I only imagined feeding my baby. Everything else, it grew because others believed in it too." The woman looked thoughtful. "Do you ever think it will end?" Leora shook her head. "Not while there are mothers willing to give. Not while there are babies who need." As dusk settled around them, the woman placed a hand on her belly, and Leora looked at her, not just as a future mother, but as a future keeper of the flame. The idea didn't belong to Leora anymore. It belonged to all of them. And still, there was more to do. She had begun collaborating with scientists working on mapping the micronutrients of donor milk, studying its impact on long-term childhood development. She helped fund mobile clinics in remote areas, bringing safe pumping equipment and education where none had existed. She supported cultural liaisons who made sure the programs honored local customs and didn't impose foreign models where they didn't fit. All while keeping one promise to herself, to never let the milk lose its meaning. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she would take out the original handwritten logbook, the one from the freezer in her first house. The dates were smudged. Some entries crooked, rushed. She had recorded every bag by hand, before there were barcodes and scanning systems and automated cold chains. It made her smile, how clumsy and hopeful it had all been. One evening, after her daughter had gone to bed and the house had settled into hush, Leora stood by the window with that book in her hands. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the tree she'd planted. The leaves rustled softly, like whispers of all the mothers who had ever given something of themselves to keep another life alive. And in that silence, surrounded by the memory of her own journey and the knowledge that it had become something far bigger than her, she whispered back into the dark. "Thank you." Years turned to decades. The world changed, as it always does. New technologies emerged, new generations rose, but some things remained sacred. The act of giving. The quiet strength of women. The nourishment passed from one body to another without expectation of return. Leora aged gently, not with the retreat of someone stepping away, but with the grace of someone becoming part of the landscape she helped create. She moved slower, spoke less in meetings, but when she did speak, people still leaned in to listen. Her hair turned silver, her hands soft-lined and warm. Her daughter, grown, brilliant, kind, had begun taking over more of the work. Not because she felt obligated, but because she believed in it. The mission had passed on not as duty, but as legacy. The original factory had become a heritage site of sorts. Students visited to learn. Mothers came to see where it all began. Donors walked the halls like pilgrims. On the wall hung a tapestry stitched by hundreds of hands, each one a story of giving, each thread a life touched. And one day, when the tree outside the old building bloomed early, its blossoms falling like snow into the courtyard, Leora came for a quiet visit. No press. No announcement. Just her and the tree. Her daughter was with her, as was a small boy, her grandson, wide-eyed and curious, holding her hand tightly. They stood beneath the canopy, and Leora looked up at the branches. "This tree," she said, "grew from a small seed. It shouldn't have survived the city ground. But it did." Her grandson looked up, wonder in his eyes. "Why?" She smiled, kneeling beside him. Because it wanted to. Because the world made room for it. He nodded solemnly, as children do when they absorb truths without needing explanation. Later that night, Leora sat by the window in her quiet home, a cup of warm milk in her hands. Not because it was part of a ritual, but because it comforted her. She watched the wind play through the trees. Thought of all the mothers she'd met. The babies fed. The lives mended. She thought of the tears and laughter, the exhaustion and joy, the uncountable moments that had built the movement. Her body, once the source of milk that started it all, was now soft with time. But her heart, her vision, remained full. She closed her eyes, not with sadness, not with longing, but with a gentle satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing you have poured everything of yourself into something that mattered. And in that quiet, surrounded by peace, the story of Leora came to its natural close, not an ending, but a return. Back to stillness. Back to the source. The factory still stands. The milk still flows. The mothers still give. And somewhere, a baby drinks from a bottle filled with life and love, and never knows that it all began with one woman, in a quiet kitchen, simply choosing to give. We will be stopping here. Kindly like, subscribe and comment your opinion on this. God bless you.